Hello, and welcome to C Center for Young Black Professionals 2023 video podcast series titled The Way Forward, Black Mental Health and Change Makers. Today's episode is a conversation on creating organizational culture with the Black youth workforce in mind. We'd like to start by getting into a quick acknowledgement by saying we would like to acknowledge the land in which we live, work, raise our families, and live our day-to-day lives. We pay tribute to the many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people that were the original stewards of this land. We also want to acknowledge that those who came here involuntarily, forcibly displaced Africans brought here because of the transatlantic slave trade and slavery. The C team is grateful for the opportunity to utilize the space in delivering our services to support and empower the Black community that now calls this city home. Without further ado, we really just want to say thank you to the City of Toronto for actually funding this project and allowing this to happen. This is a series of very meaningful conversations, and we think that it's important that we place a spotlight on it, and no better way than to invite some very meaningful guests with us today. And I would love for us to get to know each other a bit better. And really just start with introduction. So tell me who you are, what you do.
Okay, I'm Anastasia Gordon, and I have the privilege to be at C as their Director of Programs and Service Delivery. And I've been here for the past 5 months, and my career has spanned across the corporate landscape as well as the nonprofit sector, and more recently has been around building on my expertise or experience within the partnership landscape and bridge building in how we create meaningful opportunities for workforce development for Black youth. And so I'm honored to be here having a conversation with y'all.
Awesome.
Hi, everyone. My name is Janelle Hinds. I'm the founder and executive director at Helping Hands, which is a youth-led organization focused on helping young people get engaged in their communities. The easy way, how I describe it when I'm talking to youth, is we help make sure that Ontario youth get the 40 hours of volunteering that they have to do in order to graduate, but not only do they volunteer somewhere that just to get it done, but use that as a early career exploration opportunity. So looking at what's a potential volunteering in a potential career or a skill that they feel like they really want to improve on, and using that as an opportunity to build their resume. But on this topic, I've worked at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health, so ChemH, for 2 years in a previous life. And my background actually was engineering before I got into this work.
Yes. I'm so excited because I'm already seeing the connections right now. So I'll share a little bit about myself too. So I'm the community engagement specialist with C, and my background really is coming from community work. So that's what I studied at Sheridan, community work, outreach, and development. And really I found a passion for engaging with community, and particularly youth. And from then I've had a variety of different experiences, from like working one-to-one to working in group settings with youth aged even 8 to 12, very young, upwards to even my own age now, which is 26. So really took that perspective and then decided, like, through different employment opportunities I've had, youth need resources and we need to be connected. And looking at the community, it's like, okay, we have to find ways to get together. So I love this already. Partnerships right away, and like exposure, huge.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm loving that already. But I want to hand it over to Anastasia to sort of lead us off with some of our questions.
Sure. Okay. Well, it's certainly an honor to be sitting beside both of you and looking forward to our conversation. Okay. What methods do we feel can be used to collect feedback from Black youth about the organization's culture and make continuous improvements based on their input?
I feel like I do want to hop in here from a Black youth perspective. Feedback is really important, and I don't think there's enough ways to get it that are really raw. Like, from a culture point of view, I feel like beyond looking at what companies might be posting online, like on their social medias, or by looking at like reviews on Indeed, there isn't really a lot of ways we can find out like how satisfied are people working for these organizations, and like what sort of opportunities or like energy are they putting out to make sure that their staff feels like involved, valued, like they're cultivating, a space for us to like grow and thrive. So, yeah, that's something I'm definitely interested in, like seeing some of your perspectives, like even with youth and getting them exposure, like how are they reporting back, I guess, in a way.
Yeah, I think that's I'll say it's kind of a hard one because, a lot of companies do employment engagement surveys and everything, but I think everyone kind of the running gag is people are scared to sometimes say the truth of how they feel about their employers when you know that, especially if you are one of the few Black youth and maybe you experience racism, how do you actually say that in an employment engagement, even if it's anonymous? If you're the only one, it's kind of obvious when they're reading it, it's probably you giving feedback. So I do think there's difficulty in that. I think there needs to be always anonymous ways to give feedback. But I think also, I'll say from my organization's perspective, so right now I have about 7 full-time staff, plus we always have placement students and then volunteers / co-op students, all depend on what time of the year it is. And what we do is like weekly team meetings, but these meetings are about getting the more younger staff or the younger placements to be able to like not only give feedback on how they're feeling, but also just be like, hey, how do you feel about a project that's happening? And I do feel like by having these weekly meetings, it is helping the team stay engaged. And sometimes they will be like, oh, like we're not really feeling this that we're doing right now. And that's how I'm kind of getting feedback that's at least informal. And I think maybe companies need to look at ways, how do you get more of that informal feedback? And I like kind of what you were talking about, like Indeed, even looking at what do previous employees say. And I'd be like, I think some companies be like, oh, they were just bitter. But it's like, why were they bitter? That is feedback, exactly as you said.
Yeah, I think there are a couple ways in which Etsy particularly, I think is a great model that I wish I had in my previous roles. Going through particularly our program, there's surveys that are done throughout programming, beginning, middle, and end. And to your point, not all of them are surveys that might be, on a particular platform or, hey, send an email, tell us what you think, but like creating more opportunities for engagement, whether it's in person, casual dialogue, conversation over meals, because those are the ways in which we can authentically share in a space that doesn't necessarily feel super stuffy, or just, again, like recognizing that folks have different strengths, and the ways in which we're able to like capture that or be able to provide accessibility so that all folks feel like they're contributing in meaningful ways and being able to share or provide their feedback, and that they're being seen or heard. So yeah, I think like providing multiple ways in which we're gathering feedback, making it consistent, and also even like involving folks in that process. So, what are the questions that we're deciding that we want to ask? Are we clear on like what the goal is? Understanding the why of certain activities can really help folks in feeling like what they have to say matters, and that there are multiple ways in which that they can provide feedback.
One thing I think I'll add to this is it's not just about how you receive feedback, but what you do with the feedback. I think it's really important, and I'm really sad that continuously see this not happening, but it's when people do provide feedback, making sure you report back to the larger group
Yep.
on
Yep.
what, like, yes, we heard that feedback, and now this is what we're doing
Results.
about it. And I think even if it's negative, and I'll give a quick example, like, it was a part of a research project I was doing where there was a, we had a youth, kind of steering committee, and, they were kind of coming up with the design of an app. And, sometimes the bosses, or because of budget constraints, they'd be like, we can't do X, but they never went back to the youth. So one day I sat there, took back feedback from all the months, even before I was there, literally put it into a table and was like, for every single line of feedback, this is what happened, or this is why this thing could not happen. And I think, sometimes it is true that sometimes you might give feedback in an employment situation and be like, hey, we can't do this because of budget constraints or undue hardship. But at least give your employees that feedback, I think, is super critical, because that will make people continuously want to give open and honest feedback if they know that their feedback is being heard and received.
Yeah, I love that point, actually, because C is just different, right? Like, in terms of open dialogue, discussion, and I love that point specifically before I even get into that, about the fact that you went back to provide clarity and like, okay, this is where we're at now, because even though it could be, not ideal, the response, at least there's some like level of understanding that can be given and some closure, at least, because, sometimes it's just in the back of your head, like, I wonder what happened with that thing. Oh, I guess they just don't care. And then all of these assumptions start to form that, don't necessarily need to be there, which ultimately then you get people who start to disengage, because it's like, and then when issues come up later, it's like, okay, well, I had feedback for that, and where did it go? And here we are today. So, it can sort of breed, a shift in attitude, I think, when it comes to culture, especially if you have a group of employees, in particular, if in the Black culture, like, we're going to talk, right? So it's like, hey, I said that to so-and-so, and I don't know what happened with it, but you could see where it's going. Yeah, and we're just going to talk amongst ourselves, because it's like, it almost feels invalidating, almost, if you're not being heard and nothing's coming back, right? So no, I really love that point. And to follow up really shortly, like, C is amazing for that. Like, I remember Anastasia, like, I was a student with C for a couple of months before I got into this role, and Anastasia would come to me like, yeah, I have an open door policy. I was like, okay, like, I've heard that before, right? And then literally when I walk by, I'm like, her door's open. Okay, let's test this a little further. Hey, how you doing? What's going on? And she actually made time and space, right? And even after my student opportunity was wrapping up, you came for feedback and like, what is going on? How was your experience? Is there anything we can change? And that made a world of difference for me to see, like, okay, it's not all talk. So, I think organizations can sort of mirror that transparency and that willingness to sort of be vulnerable. Like, we're not going to assume we know it all every time. We actually care about your feedback to bring it and like see if there's anything we could change. So, yeah.
One other point about it, I think, is also making sure you do that feedback more frequently. If doing like one employment engagement a year, the time of the year could have been maybe bad or like good, and you're missing
Frequency
out.
counts.
So I think also the frequency counts, and just trying not only maybe like 10-point scales, like trying stuff where. I'll say this is more youth facing when it comes to programming, but we did this one where it's just like faces of Drake or like faces of different people and this different emotions, and we're like, check in and you let us know which emotion you feel. Drake was the first one I tried, and it was popular, and since then I was like, yeah, I found a winner.
Listen, we gotta do what we gotta do to
Exactly.
to relate to the youth.
So like in case of an organization, look at how do you engage your employees,
100%.
being like asking someone how do you feel on a scale of 1 to 10 might not mean a lot to them, but being like, hey, like here's the different emotions or different parts, maybe that might be more useful feedback for the organization.
So, like different options, right? Different avenues and options for feedback, I think is key. And we touched on this a little bit, but how can organizations encourage open and honest communication channels to address concerns or challenges Black youth face in the workplace. I can speak to for me in particular, give you guys a moment to think on it, but something that was really memorable for me, and starting my career in film and TV as an actor, I was really, really excited to like be on set. For folks like who might not know, there's often a series of auditions that folks have to do to actually get on set. And so once you get there, you obviously have so much pride. You're really excited. And one of the things that I found was really challenging was I'd get on set, and this is, 20-something years ago, and there was no one on set who knew how to do my hair or knew how to do my makeup. And immediately I felt like, well, do I really belong here? Because I've done the work, I've been casted, and that feeling really left me questioning whether this was the right industry for me. And so after experiencing that time and time again, I was like, well, who do I tell? Do I tell my agent? Do I tell my mom and my dad? Telling folks on set, does that make me seem ungrateful? And so I get on to in front of the camera, and I'd look at there's usually a little screen where you can see yourself, and I'm like, I look really ashy and I don't feel great. And I have to deliver these lines. I have to do what I need to do. And so for me, I didn't know who I could tell about this issue. And, also being a youth and a young person, you're like, well, again, if I tell, my agent, will that affect, work in the future? If I tell folks on set, do I have the right to say something? So I think and then, later on, being able to tell my agent, and my agent was able to negotiate on my end. And although she couldn't necessarily fix the greater problem, which we can get to about, what has been and definitely evolved in the film and TV industry in terms of representation of folks, behind the camera. But if I hadn't gone and talked to my agent, that could have affected, and essentially did, how I felt about this career choice that I had made, or this decision that I had made. And so, having those channels in which you can go through, or know that you can speak to someone about challenges or things that you're seeing that might not that are creating more barriers for you is really important. And something I, again, really value at C is, the reason why I was able to, connect with Matthias in that way was because, other leadership showed that to me. Our executive director had the same mentality around, an open door policy, and created opportunities for us, whether it's in meetings to talk about, what do we want to stop, start, and continue, right? What's great here, what's not. And so, again, the more opportunities we have to allow folks to be honest, right? Or the more opportunities we have to provide ways in which feedback can be given, the more honest people can feel like, okay, well, you really care. And so I think, within our professional careers, we can name a number of ways in which we might have encountered injustices, but particularly for youth, it's so impactful and so critical that that those spaces are made available.
Yeah, I agree. You said something that really hit for me, and that's that when you didn't want to seem ungrateful. That was big, because I think as far as we're talking about the overall scheme of culture and how that plays a role into mental health. And for me, I just think how many of us feel that way, because it's often this thing we have to work so hard to get to a certain place, and then when you get there, you're trying so hard to keep it that anything that actually should be relatively small to address seems like the world. You know what I mean? So like that really touched a point for me. But I think that's something that overall like should be addressed culturally in that spaces. And I hope as more of us start to, you know, immerse ourselves in different industries and at different levels, like that can be definitely something that's taken into consideration, just to like reach out to people that look like us and are in a similar position and be like, listen, I see your work. I appreciate you. If there's anything that, you know, is on your mind or you want to know, like, come talk. Like that means so much, just to even, you know, release that. But yeah.
I was saying, when you first said that you were in the entertainment industry, I kind of was laughing because we had a whole conversation right before this started about how I've done a little bit of background work. I'm trying to get my son more into it, but the difficulties when it comes to matching, especially Black youth, because there are very little positions when it comes to young kids in the industry. And I realized, I'm like, a big part, I think, is like that humanization of being like, I think back at it of some of my first jobs, I don't think I really, not saying I didn't see my managers as humans, but I was so intimidated by my managers when I first started, because I got my first job at 15, and I was just scared of them. There wasn't I didn't feel like I could go to them with an issue. I didn't feel like I could talk to them. It was just like, okay, yes, I must listen to you. Yes, I must revere you. And I realize now with my placement students and staff, as they come on, I like to tell them stories, and I tell them a lot of the stories of like how I've messed up on things. I've said like my very first workshop that I cried, you know, on the bus home for it, and try and share that, and hoping that they recognize that like I have been in their position, and hoping that that builds that trust with them. And I think that is kind of one of the biggest ways that I think managers, if you're like, how could we do better, is like making sure that our employees know that like we have been in their position, and maybe you might not have been in their exact position, but sharing whatever stories you think they could most relate to you as.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and actually leads us to the next question around, you know, mentorship and the opportunity that leadership has in helping Black youth employees thrive in organizational culture. So I'll pose the question. So what role can mentorship and leadership development programs play in helping Black youth employees thrive in organizational culture?
I mean, I can start with this one. So I think, you know, even when we say that leadership development programs, you only tend to think of the big corporates, the banks that kind of have those systems in place. I do think, you know, smaller organizations may not be thinking about that. But for me, what we do when we, any placement student, volunteer, anything comes on, is that we actually ask them what are their longer career aspirations. And I will say, so right now, with exception of one person that we recently hired just because of timing, 100% of my staff basically in the past have all been previous placement students, co-op students, volunteers. And it's because they'll tell me, and a lot of them are now in roles that they were not ever trained for. So my HR didn't go to school here for HR. And it was her saying that I want this, and I was like, okay, cool. I can now try to make sure I'm putting you in the places and the skill sets, maybe get you start volunteering on a task or two, so that way you understand what that, you know, career path may be for you. And I feel like smaller organizations can do that. And I think it's a big benefit to smaller organizations
100%.
to be able to say, I have the staff that understands things, have been with us a while, instead of people, you know, leaving and now having to spend a bunch of money on recruitment again. So I think, you know, smaller organizations can really focus on being like, how do I look at the skill set and maybe what potential futures people want. And I'll say, I was talking to a large organization at one point, and I was asking, they were talking about their employee engagement survey, and they were just making complaints about it. I was like, oh, so like, but how do you do sponsorship? How do you guys care about younger people? And the answer was they had literally never thought about asking their younger staff, because the problem with their employee engagement skills, their younger staff and older, like age-wise was a completely different results. And I was just like, I wonder why they keep leaving, because they do not see any future potential in the organization. And it's the same reason why I left CAMH. Like, I did not see any potential in me staying and being able to move up within the organization. So I was like, I have to leave. So I think kind of that's my biggest thing, is that reminding smaller organizations there are ways that you guys can build your own leadership and mentorship programs internally.
Yeah, I'd love to just rally off that, because that's a big thing. I have a sort of reverse engineering mindset too, right? So I always think of like, okay, I'm trying to get here. How do we backstep from there? Like, where am I at now? And funny enough, like in some of the learnings, like project management and things like that, you learn like when you set things out like that, based on the culture that an organization takes on, they have different opportunities. And I find that in smaller organizations, because I've worked for them, you know, some family, some more professional, like on paper, startups, there's more room for creativity in terms of like what's being creative, right? And I think that something that's really appreciated is when you're looking at those long-term goals, like you said, and then you're aligning that with the work that you have. And funny enough, you'll get more out of me doing it that way. You know, I can not only see the value that it provides for the organization, which I'm obviously invested in if I'm working alongside you. Hopefully it's not just for a paycheck, right? But ultimately, if I'm seeing that, okay, you're trying to set me up to take on tasks, responsibilities, and roles, even though it might be more than what was my description on paper, I'm more willing to say, yeah, give me that. I'll help you. I'll go that extra mile. I'll say it, you name it, I'm there. Because that sort of approach works so well. And shout out Trinae for that, because literally professional development goals, it's like, okay, how does this fit into what you're doing now? I'm like, you know, we can really, that's a really good point to bring up. So yeah, I appreciate that.
I just want to really quickly say, I think I even love the fact of being like, making sure you communicate with youth back on why you're doing something, and also recognizing that some of them might not know what those next steps are. So if you're giving them something, be really clear on like, this is why I'm giving you this opportunity, or like, I'm not just giving you more responsibility, I'm giving you an opportunity, and phrasing it like that to them so they recognize, and that way they know how best in the workforce to live up to your expectations, I think was so important. So I really appreciate you bringing that point up.
I think also when you look at it from, I guess, a partnership lens is looking at how we're able to provide opportunity for youth within the workforce. Specifically, I foresee, you know, in the industries that we focus on, where there are labor gaps, that mentorship and sponsorship is so key. And so a lot of that is some of the engagement that, you know, as an organization that we have in allowing folks to see and understand the issues that lie you know, within, right? So for the fact that, you know, within the TV and film industry, recognizing that there are not a lot of black folks within the industry, within, you know, within what we call below the line work. And so the importance of us bringing folks along on the journey and understanding why C is here, what we do, and that we really are reliant on those partnerships and mentorship opportunities for youth within these industries so they know what's possible for them. And then specifically as it relates to, you know, in whatever industry that you might be looking at, it's important that there's, you know, diversity amongst not just at a manager level, but at a senior, at a leadership level, and then beyond that, ensuring that, you know, what do your boards look like? You know, if a black young professional was to walk into your workspace, would they be inspired by what they see? Could they see themselves? And so going beyond kind of just like, you know, checking of a box around, you know, saying we're doing the thing, but ensuring that like the checks and balances are there. And in order for Black folks to thrive within that organizational culture, like I said, they need to be able to see that it's there, that there's consistency, that there's upward mobility, and that folks can guide. So, you talked about your manager being able to really clearly, connect on what your goals are and where you want to be, and then helping you kind of better understand, well, what's it going to take to get there, but also, again, to your point, Janelle, around like, understanding the why. So, hey, like, we're not just giving you busy work, but these things are aligned with the goals that you've outlined, and allowing them to know that they also have autonomy, and can contribute and create the path that they want to go on in terms of their professional development.
Yeah, love that, Herbie.
Yeah. So we are going to go on a break. But we'll be right back.
Awesome.
Five seconds. That's all it takes for your first impression of me. Know how long it takes to shake it off? A lifetime. But I'm not waiting. I've got dreams to build. Places to be. Bias will not slow me down. Injustice won't define me. Nor a narrative written in a time before me. I'm here to show you who I really am. Nobody knows what it takes like I do. Like we do. It's time for the world not to just look at us, but to see us. It's time for the world to know that no matter what, Black youth can.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Kofi Hope.
Hi, everybody. My name is Shireen Ashman.
And we are co-founders for the C Center for Young Black Professionals. And today we want to talk a little bit about C's journey. So the history of C really goes back to 2005, the year of the gun, which is, to be honest, an emotional time to think about, especially with where we are in 2020 with gun violence in community, and having seen a few of those cycles. But at that time, it was a year that was incredibly traumatic. So many young Black men and women lost their lives. I was a student and advocate at the time, and so many of us in community were saying, we need a real response, and a response that invests in youth and actually understands Black youth aren't the problem here, but the solution. And with the right supports, we can actually turn the tide around these issues. And from that was birthed, the Youth Challenge Fund and a series of responses, but YCF specifically one about supporting new initiatives that could be led by Black youth, focused around meeting the needs of young Black men and women who are facing barriers. And so when I came back to Canada, I was overseas, I was approached around a project, what they called a legacy project of the Youth Challenge Fund, and asked if I could start assembling a team and getting folks together to build an organization that could have an impact around these issues. And so C really started in 2012 in the Jane Finch community. We spent a year doing research, trying to figure out, what was the right place for us to be to create economic opportunities and move youth forward in a way that was actually authentic to what young people were looking at in their lives.
And for me, as a survivor of gun violence, like connecting with Kofi around this issue was of huge importance to me. I wanted to do work in this area, not specifically around how do I kind of heal communities from gun violence, but how do I help Black youth to discover and uncover their talents so that they don't have to see that type of avenue as the only way. And how do I help them to kind of rediscover their talent? And that's one side of it, but also demonstrate to the larger public that Black youth is a talent pool that is untapped. And it definitely requires their investment, not only financial investment, but leadership investment, and looking at how do we bring that to the fore in a very practical way. And a lot of the curriculum was around exposure, like exposing Black youth to different avenues, different opportunities, different industries in which they probably have not maybe explored before, and even exposing Black youth to different spaces in their own city. Kofi is always the leader in terms of bringing us into nature and teaching us about different plants and etc. So it was just always important for me that that level of exposure is there.
Yeah.
Right? Not only for industry, but as a person, like building the whole person. Because I think, and I continue to think, that really sound career that is long lasting happens when the person feels whole. Right? And when they know what their different strengths are, and when they have a system of support of folks, whether that's inside of their communities or outside of their communities, but just a system of social capital that they can go to say, hey, like, I have this problem, or I need to figure out how the system navigate this thing. And to this day, I still get calls from some of my members that I worked with in 2012, 2013, around like, okay, this thing is happening at work, Shireen, like, what do you think I should do?
We are the C Center for Young Black Professionals.
Committed to cultivating a talent pool
of young Black professionals
that positively impacts
the Canadian labor market.
Hi, welcome back. The conversation has been so good so far. We really enjoyed that. We just got back from our quick break, so without further ado, we do want to hand it off to Janelle to start off this round.
Yeah, so all I'll say is some of the questions I had, I'll just give some context. When I first came up with questions that I am thinking about, questions that I'm like, I would love to hear other people's answers, had my own inklings of what I want, what I do at the organization, but really excited to hear from you two on what I can even take back into my own organization. And the first one is a little bit of a heavy hitter, I would say. So when Black youth encounter workplace discrimination, what actions can they take as they might be worried about potential retaliation? And I've thought about this one because I've been in that situation where I've been really scared and have actually given feedback and faced retaliation for giving feedback, not once, but at 2 different organizations. So love to hear from you two.
Yeah, I would. Yeah, I'll jump on this. So funny enough, I used 2 strategies. Because I've encountered situations where it's like I'm privy to information, or I have ideas that I'm thinking about implementing, and I'm just like, based off of how my employers sort of moved with me or with others, I'm just like, yeah, now's not the time, especially thinking about how it can happen. And oftentimes if there's thoughts about something to do, that responsibility comes back on me for some reason. Like, oh, I found this challenge, or so-and-so is talking to me about something, and it's like, okay, well, what do you think you can do about that? And it's like, that's not the way it should be. I find that quite toxic. Like, I get it, asking for input is important, but I'm coming to you hoping that you can help me find a solution, right? As management or whomever it may be, senior leadership even, and especially HR, because now, online HR seems like it's really for the company and not for the employees at times. So to really answer the question, I spoke with some of my Black colleagues. That's like, I alluded to that before too, is like, those are who and select people at that, not, just, there's always individuals in the workplace who, or there tend to be, I should say, individuals in the workplace that you work alongside that tend to be more of, I hate to say it, but complainers. And I didn't approach those individuals. I went to people who I thought, thought rationally about things and really were invested in their job and like would point out to me something that I was maybe missing if that were the case. Like, I experienced this, like, am I right? Like, they could validate me and I could trust them with their opinions, just be like, that was real. You know what I mean? So talking with my colleagues was a big one. And they didn't even necessarily have to be in my role. Oftentimes I would talk to people in different departments even, like, what's your experience over there? How does your manager treat you? Like, you've been here longer. Tell me what the flow has been. Even if they have context on dealing with prior situations, I really sort of try to rely on my confidants in the workplace and really sort of feed off their experiences. But genuinely, I have very good relationships outside of work, and I tend to actually have a fairly good relationship with my mother. So I would reach out to my mom and be like, well, Mom, you and your friends have been working for some period of time and in different areas. Do you know somebody I can talk to who's in a similar space that can give me some insight? I'm like, is it something I'm doing? Is it like, are there norms within this workplace that I'm just not privy to? Because, not every industry is the same. If you go to like construction, it'd be like, yeah, we get here at 7. We keep it really like cut to the point and you can run certain jokes, right? But if you're in like a corporate space, that doesn't apply, right? You're in a different environment totally. So, the code switching turns on, you're very calculated sometimes about how you come off and what you say. So, really just understanding the environment, I feel like getting that context was really important for me because it helped me navigate some situations, especially when I didn't feel confident going to the HR department or somebody and being like, hey, well, I need this or this is happening, because what I've gotten, lightly sort of probing, because, sort of like asking for a friend HR, but, what would happen if this? And it only goes so far. So I feel like, yeah, relying on colleagues is definitely huge. Colleagues you trust, and yeah, your relationships.
Love that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll echo on the relationships part because, navigating personally my career, being fresh out of school, and you're like early 20s, and not necessarily even understanding the rights that you have, or even being able to recognize what microaggressions are, or just, recognizing what's what, and if you are not being treated fairly, or if there's signs of anti-Blackness. So much of those things for me personally were like, oh, well, I guess this is just the way it is. And I couldn't name it. I couldn't necessarily name what was happening. And so I think, again, relationships are so key. As I was able to, connect with my siblings and talk about like being in the workplace, but not everyone has siblings that they can, talk to. So, mentorship and having community supports and these open dialogues can really allow a young person navigate, how do I move through this? And particularly, the inner work that also we are tasked with, understanding knowledge of self, some of the activities that we go through in programming around, the C essentials, and looking at what is a microaggression? What does that look like? How does it show up in the workplace? Is as important as actual programming that takes place and the technical training components. It's identifying, understanding, and then being able to advocate for yourself and others in those positions. Because as you said, if we're kind of left to have to like knock on HR's door, you know, in many places, folks might not feel safe to do that.
Yeah, like, and just a quick takeaway from that, it's because when you don't know, it could feel like a nagging pain, right? Because you're just like, what is that? I don't know what that is, but it doesn't feel good.
Right.
Where is it coming from? And that can play with your mental health for so long,
100%.
especially if unaddressed. It's like so many times now, it's just like I'm having these, I don't know, revelations or points of enlightenment where I'm like, oh, that's what that is.
Oh, that's what that was.
Yeah.
Right? Like,
you
yeah.
know?
Yeah.
And it's just so freeing to be like, okay, got you, right? And now, okay, I'm going to move this way. And it's less of like a overall theme in life, because that could bog down
Oh, yeah.
the work, that could bog down personal, that could bog down confidence, because now you're talking about something like you're unsure, you know, and that shows up different ways. I like how you mentioned like there's intersectionality, or like there's a direct connection between what's happening in your personal life and what's happening or internally and what's happening externally, how that shows up, right?
Mm-hmm. And that it's a often you're like, well, is it me? Especially as a youth or young person, right? Like, is it me? And we have to look at this as like this has been a systemic issue within, you know, not only the workforce, but within the education system, within the healthcare system. So when you're kind of being bombarded at like, you know, every which angle, that is where, again, relationships and conversations around this is a systemic thing. It's not a you thing. And again, how that can alleviate some of the, you know, pain, essentially, that can be inflicted, you know, in that way. So
I would say I really like what you guys have to say, and some takeaways I'm hearing, you know, I'll say towards the youth. One, finding that confidant in the workforce, and it might not only be another young person, it might be, you know, one of your Black colleagues, because you might be the only one, which was my case in the time I, you know, complained. Is finding who you do think might be your supporter. I really like a point you brought up of how the different industries are. I do think one thing I would, you know, caution the youth is we sometimes ask our friends for advice, but they might be in a different sector that plays differently. So trying to find people in your industry to get feedback from. And I think the one benefit that, you know, we have as young people right now is the fact that we can go online and find advice, or there are so many amazing community organizations like C, like Helping Hands, that will be able to provide that feedback. And in case of some of the ones where you do think there is a legal issue, there is actually free legal aid available. And I wish I could remember exactly what it was, but I did search it up one time, but it is available through, I think, the Ontario kind of bar, where you can get a 30-minute call with someone and they can give you free legal advice on whether, you know, you should pursue this or find an employment lawyer. And that was so useful to know. And I would say to organizations, you know, kind of back to your point about open and honest feedback, and kind of that whole, I laughed when you kind of said that HR is there for the company, because that's what my mom used to tell me. And when I went to HR for the first time, I was like, oh, I get it. And that shouldn't be how HR feels. So I think that goes back to that open and honest feedback of, if you created a great environment, your employees won't feel that HR is not there for you. So I loved just how much this all like kind of tied in together. But kind of my next question is kind of a little, I think, really more open-ended question. But what measures and initiatives can organizations adopt to ensure that Black youth employees feel appreciated, supported, and empowered to excel in their jobs?
Talk about how we did on projects that were given in front of other people. Sometimes I get it, like and I'm talking about prior work experience. You know, sometimes it's, sometimes we're talking like, you know, oh, I need you to do this. I need you to do that. I need you to pivot here. I need you to increase these numbers. I need you to go talk to this person, whatever it is, right? And it's like, okay, get there, constantly getting there. And then sometimes, in my experience, what I found is sometimes the goalpost is moved, right? And it's like, okay, well, what was 100% before is now 80. So it's like you never acknowledge the fact that, you know, 80 now was 100. So when we get there, then what, right? Are you going to say, oh, well, we're back to the start? Or are you going to be like, okay, I acknowledge the work. Actually, so-and-so really pulled this together. And, you know, that other person really came clutch with that information. We really appreciate it. And as a matter of fact, like, I have a meeting coming up. Like, I want to mention this because you guys did phenomenal and you were asking about these things. So this could probably help us do that. Like, share the transformation, share the vision, right? Share, like, the impact, share what matters. Because oftentimes I feel like I felt like there's all these important things that are going on. If everything's pressing, how come when I get some work done, it's not important anymore? That doesn't make sense, right? If it was that pressing, it was that priority, you had to send me the urgent this and the drop everything else, then where's the equal gratitude and appreciation for that? It has to be the same. It's almost like the reverse. I'm not sure if you both have heard, but like usually there's something I heard that, and it's completely off topic. Sorry. It's essentially like how far you go with a disrespect is the same platform you should use to apologize, or more, right? So it's like if I say something, if one of you says something embarrassing about me here on this podcast, for example, you should do a public apology to me as well. You can't bring me to some back room and be like, oh, yeah, I'm sorry about that thing that you said. It's not equivalent, right? But in the same regard, if we're talking about some big project that needs to be that needs to be worked on, and so, okay, you're talking to everybody about how big this thing is, talk about how big of a contribution the people in that happening played, right? So I feel like it's not rocket science. It's just that people want to be included and recognized. And that makes us show up even more and using more, I understand, like, from a leadership perspective, sometimes the usage of language like we and us and our, and that is important, but we need to take it one more further and be like, such a person did this thing. That's more meaningful, but I get it, like, in certain contexts, the time and place, but that's more of that, I think, would get more people to, especially you, to invest, because it's like, okay, I played a role, and it wasn't just, behind the scenes only.
What I'll say is, when you were kind of sharing that, it reminded me of a story of a workplace I had where we would sit around. They had, like, the office table. The kind of higher ups would all sit in the middle, and all the and it was really much by your job title. All the research associates would sit on the outside of the room. And I remember just being like, why aren't we talking? Like, what is the point of us coming to a meeting and saying nothing? And I will never forget a meeting where one of them was like, oh, how's this project going? Oh, should we do this? And he's like, I don't know. I really don't know what this is doing. I'm like, the person who's doing the work is sitting right behind you, and never bothered to turn around and ask her for, like, what her advice on how to, go forward was. And I just was just like, no wonder why people keep leaving this team. Like, they don't feel valued, they don't feel appreciated, you're not even giving them a voice. And when they are doing amazing work and reaching, their key performance indicators above schedule, you're not even thanking them publicly in front of the whole team. You might do it one-on-one, but why aren't you doing it in front of the whole group if you are claiming the work that they did? And I think, that really reminds me of, like, yeah, there needs to be more thanking your employees. And I feel like sometimes people don't like to thank because they're like, oh, you're here for your job, so, like, I don't need to thank you. And it's like, no, you guys were human. Like, why would we not thank someone even if it is just for doing their job. So, I really appreciate you sharing that, because I think, when I think about the times, I do wish it probably would have helped me to hear a thank you better. And I'll say kind of my answer to the first thing I thought about is from the point of recruiting, making sure, we're paying our black youth, fairly. I remember getting a job where I had already previous job experience, but it was before I had graduated. I had done, within engineering, I did a 16-month long co-op. And when I was getting that first job when I graduated, I was told, no, I'm going to be at pay level 0. First of all, I wasn't even hired for the job role that matched my degree. So it was already paid lower than I should have been. And then on top of that, they wouldn't want to pay me at the pay scale that would have represented my, years in the workforce, because it did not count. And I think about how many black youth are doing work in their community, work in their schools, and maybe have had more informal job opportunities before that. And are you recognizing that that counts as job history? Why were they good enough to employ but not good enough to pay fairly?
Yeah, that's huge. And that actually reminds me of an article I was reading the other day too about just work experience, right? How that's honored in the workplace, because the article was alluding to the fact that more people have multiple streams of income. They have more than one job. So it's like, and some of those people are entrepreneurs, so they work for themselves. So the argument or the statement was like, is it worth your while to hire somebody who sort of has their own thing going and might prioritize their own, right? But here's the thing that's being left out of the equation is that person has the creativity, that person has the drive, that person is invested in the right areas, knows how to prioritize, that person is in your organization, is going to make an impact, and you're adding that to the team. They're not being subtracted because they have something else going on, like the economy is... He's right. So it's like you can't fault people for trying to find a way to live. You know what I mean? But at the same time, you should be taking into account their experiences to see how it's strength based, right?
Yeah, and to your point, one of the conversations I've had with folks is there's so much that lies beneath the surface in terms of our day-to-day jobs and our work and the work that we do. But, there's also skills and talents that have not been tapped. And, the idea that, folks might want to be able to explore different opportunities within the organization based on, the strengths and abilities that they have. And so, in the positioning that I have, that as much as there is the training and development and advocacy on that end, it's also about allowing folks to, if they choose, be able to bring other parts of themselves or explore other ways in which they can be creative within their current work. And so I think, again, like exposure is important, looking at ways in which you're able to, bring different folks maybe into the workplace or take staff to, on field trips or, experiential opportunities so that folks are able to kind of see, again, to be identifying what lies beneath within skill sets that they might not even know that they have, and the ones that they know that they have is really, really important. I think compensation is certainly one of those topics. I know within the nonprofit sector, there are limitations, but again, focusing and looking at how are the ways in which you can create value within the work that you're doing and allow people to be fed in the way that they need to be fed, and that you're creating opportunities for personal and professional development within the workplace is also something that's really important. And 100%. It shows that you're listening.
I'll add on one more for, a part of the question was, how do Black youth feel supported? And I think a part of it is making sure that your policies are equitable. And it seems like such a high-level statement. People are like, yeah, it is. The example I'll give is I had a member on the onboarding for this one job. They had kind of write down a list, like if you had a child, so you needed to leave like for childcare if in case anything happened. And I was like, I was doing elderly care at the time. You know, my mom was unfortunately dealing the life-altering disease, and I was like, you know, at the time, like literally would be on my phone, be like, if I need a call from her PSW, like I need, you know, to leave. But there was no way the policy worked towards me. And I was just like, why would we not have this as a more of a care, you know, policy instead of just saying childcare? And I give that example as, you know, so many Black youth are facing that we are taking on sometimes, unfortunately, more responsibility than maybe we really should have on our shoulders. But that is the reality of a lot of young Black employees. And, you know, one thing I want to say to any organization listen to this is everything that we're speaking also goes to benefit your employees in general. Because I would not have been the only person having to care about elder care. But I'm like, why should I, to a multi-thousand person organization, have to bring up, why don't you guys have this as a part of your policy? So I just wanted to kind of give out that example. Anything else anyone want to say?
And I think to your point, often we think about that and we're like, well, should it be me? Should I be the one to like bring this up? And sometimes it is yes, right? It is likely that there are folks who, you know, might maybe slightly different than your current circumstance, but the ability to speak up, you know, and feel supported in doing that is one thing, but just knowing that sometimes we just got to do it, right? And at the very least, it's brought to the forefront, and the hope is also that others will feel that freedom to be able to do that as well, because that advocacy is necessary in order for policy to change.
Sure. Well, kind of speaking on that, how can sponsorship and leadership development programs be tailored to benefit Black youth in the workforce and contribute to more inclusive organizational culture? So I know we've touched upon that a little bit more, but would love for all of us to kind of get more into what we see sponsorship as and how different organizations of different sizes could implement that.
Yeah, I think we were mentioning this briefly, and like I'm interested in expanding my understanding of sponsorship, because to me, sponsorship is, you know, you see somebody doing well, or you're speaking about them in rooms that they're not in to sort of promote them for opportunities, right? I think that's very important, because that always opens up opportunities. Sometimes we're not always in rooms where our skill set or our knowledge base or our personalities are being displayed in a way that allow us for, you know, that next level of professional development. But I can speak a little bit to the partnership side, to the leadership development side, in a way, from a learning perspective, to say like some of the older like methods I think are still tried and true, but I want to get back to sponsorship is shadowing. I think shadowing needs to come back, in terms of what does that person do? Oh, go see what they do for a day. You know, I think that's really big, because then you can sort of, not only do you sort of find where you fit in or where you want to go in an organization, but you develop a more cohesive thought in terms of, okay, this is what we're doing. This is how we operate in terms of like the whole system of things. And as far as professional development goes, just spending time on that. But I'd love for you to elaborate more on the sponsorship piece, please.
So I've been doing some public speaking for a couple of years, and it was for me a moment where someone did sponsor me to realize, why are we talking so much about mentorship versus sponsorship? And especially when I did leave to go, you know, start my own organization, meant I did not have a mentor at the time. So I was, I think, looking for my tiny little sponsors. But how I define it, and I would say speaking more to a kind of management versus just talking about senior management, is kind of actually really similar to your definition. It's knowing that you know who the people maybe under you, but I also think even coworkers could sponsor you, where you know that person, you know where they want to be, you know what opportunities might interest them, and when you hear an opportunity come up for them, you just don't go maybe tell them, like, hey, maybe you should apply for that. If you know the hiring manager, you say, hey, I have this young person in my team, I think they'd be amazing for this role. Or, you know, when you look at even companies, when they do internal awards, who tends to get those awards? It tends to be the people who are going to speak up for them, and you're never going to have younger, more diverse people in those positions or getting those awards internally if you don't have someone there sponsoring them and saying, no, this is who I want to do it. And, you know, I love to give concrete examples. So I think it's like the teacher in me. You know, I had an opportunity where I was ready to leave an organization, and they were told, can you wait? Don't do anything too rash. I've been really wanting you. I guess context, I was actually shadowing. That's how this opportunity came up. I found another project as an engineer working in a non-engineering organization in the time. There was a project where I was like, hey, I actually have a really, you know, valuable skill set that I would love to do. Can I go on my lunch and like use my lunch breaks and go visit their meetings and kind of give back? And then they started asking me to come to all their meetings. And when I was just like, hey, don't give me any, I then took on responsibility. Again, this was shadowing, was within the organization, and I found out they went to my boss and was like, hey, her contract's coming in at end. Do you mind if we hire her instead on our team? And I'm so grateful for that person to be like, they didn't have to do that. You know, obviously, yes, it benefited them, but they're still like, hey, we saw the skill Janelle had. We saw how she can be beneficial. We went and we talked on her behalf. I'm so grateful to that person to this day for that opportunity and them doing that. And again, I really like to think, and just to be clear why I say I like to use the word sponsorship versus mentorship. I feel mentorship tends to be more like, I'm just giving you advice. And that is great. And I think sponsorship still has that component to it, but sponsorship is taking that extra step where you're not going to just be like, hey, I'm giving you advice on what I think your next career should be, or it is being I am doing those actions to make sure you get to that next, you know, step on the ladder for you. And I think, you know, it's something that I brought up even I think coworkers can do. Sometimes your coworkers actually know you the best, and they actually know opportunities because they might not be on the same path as you, but they see an opportunity and they're like, you know, Janelle, you should apply for this. Or, hey, I'm going to talk to boss because I know them at the organization better than you do, and I'll ask them, you know, for advice on what you can do for this. So I think it is something that I want to be clear that I think everyone at almost any level could help other people at their organizations achieve.
That's powerful. Honestly, I feel like you just like there was something in my brain that was like this, and you said it and went, you know,
You're like,
yeah, like so.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
good.
I've been really blessed to have like a number of mentors who've certainly poured into me. But I think with sponsorship, you know, you have a certain degree of power, right? Like to influence, right? Or to so within sponsorship, I found that it has been for me with folks who were maybe one or two steps above in leadership that saw maybe some of the tools that I was putting into play from my mentors or folks that I really looked up to, and they saw, you know, maybe me putting in the work, and said, you know what, I recognize the drive, I recognize, and I also maybe see something that you don't see in yourself. And so, you know, taking it a step further, like you mentioned, and really showing an invested interest in the development, further development, and then also coming alongside them and saying, hey, like, you know, how can I continue to support your growth and development, and what doors can I open? So I think there are roles to play in which, you know, I can have a mentor who might be, you know, in a more senior position, or one that doesn't even work in an industry that I'm in, but just has skills and resources to pass on. And so I think that there's value for both of those roles, and it's kind of like passing the baton on, and you can have, you can still continue to have a mentor while you have a sponsor as well. But the importance of sponsorship and, naming someone when they're not in the room for an opportunity is so key, and it's so important amongst the Black community as well, which is why I had mentioned earlier that it's important that, companies and organizations were able to see diversity in their leadership, because folks need to realize that those positions are attainable. And then again, going back to like ensuring that your board is diverse, because that's going to impact the ways in which you are governing your organization and how you are building and developing talent within.
Yeah, that's big. Go ahead.
I would say I really love the fact that you said sometimes recognizing that something in someone that they might not even recognize themselves. I think throughout my stages, so context to this is I actually had a speech impediment when I was younger. So like public speaking, absolutely not. Like I didn't even want to raise my hand in class to talk. And I think about those people that did encourage me, did help me out, did say like, I'm a do-gooder. You have a task to do. Cool. I'm getting it done for you. And it makes sense why now I could, found and start my own organization. Is I'm thankful to those people that did encourage me. Yep. And I think about especially the context of, underrepresented youth, people that we've been facing, like have faced discrimination, a young Black woman, that intersectionality means, faced it a lot. And there are times that I still to this day, sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm not good enough for X, Y, Z. And I think that as managers, people need to recognize that your young people are facing that. They're not going to recognize stuff in themselves because they've been told they do not have it. So I think I really love that you brought up that a part of sponsorship or mentorship is even recognizing, like showing them like, oh no, you do know this, oh you are good at this. And I think that's especially where that transferable skills comes in, and us going back to talking about how much young Black people have side hustles and are doing amazing work in the community, and helping them recognize like, oh, did you recognize that this skill that you're doing out here is useful internally?
Yeah, I have a story, and I think it resonates just because so much of this opportunity that happened when I was in my late teens, someone who now, like I was like, okay, you were a sponsor, opened up an opportunity. They worked at United Way. There was an opportunity for to sit on United Way's student executive program, and that chair position actually sat on the board for United Way. And so when that person had come to me and said, hey, I think that you would be great at this. You have a lot of these, qualities that, that the opportunity, is looking for. I was like, what? What does it even mean to chair a committee? Like I had no clue. And, they were able to kind of walk me through what it meant. I had done like outreach work, and so, and loved community, and he was able to kind of show me the parallels between my experience and what was required for the role, that then gave me the confidence to be like, oh, okay, like I think I can do this. And it had such a profound influence on my entire life, because not only did that opportunity, I grew up in Scarborough, had some challenges growing up, and a lot of what I was afforded was due to exposure, right? And being able to see what was possible, and to know that, there were ways around kind of the present circumstance. And in this particular case, being able to sit as a chair, again, I went to a little school in Scarborough. I was going to, some of these high-profile high schools to talk about United Way and the importance of giving and fundraising, and the impact that United Way had on the greater community. But larger than that, I was on a monthly basis going to United Way and going to board meetings with CEOs of companies like Bell, like, the city of Toronto. And so that exposure to a room which, 20 something years ago, there was very few Black folks sitting on those committees. But what it told me was that I belonged there, and that I could walk through those doors, and I could confidently provide an update on what the student executive programming was up to. And so not only did it have an impact on me being able to know that I was meant to be in those spaces and I could have a seat at that table, but it allowed me then for me to know that I had that confidence and ability to do that as I navigated and would navigate further challenges within spaces where there weren't folks that looked like me. So whether it was, future corporate jobs, in many different spaces. So, and then be able to share that with my friends and community to know that they can also do and should feel like they are welcomed into those spaces.
Yeah, it's all resonating, like it's all sinking in.
The power of sponsorship.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking like that last point that you said specifically too is when you sponsor or you mentor somebody, you're not just mentoring or sponsoring them. You're mentoring or sponsoring the person who's beside them too.
Exactly.
So it's like, because like you said, like I could think about it, my best friend, like he's gonna know everything. He's in a different industry, but you better believe like, even one of my questions later, it's like, it's kind of his question, you know what I mean? So like we speak through each other. So I think that's very key in mentorship and sponsorship. When you open up one door, it's actually how many people are getting through that one door,
Yeah.
I really do love that point, because when I think about my friends, they've learned from me. I remember at one point I didn't want to like post on Instagram about the work I'm doing, and a friend was like, my sister watches your Instagram and she's inspired by you. And that's what like made me be like, okay, I guess I have to post. And I was just say, when I was listening to your story, one, amazing. But I think I'll speak to, the potential sponsors that we're talking to and say, it also isn't always going to be easy. There's times where maybe the person you're trying to open that door for is going to say no. And I hope that does not stop you, because I have said no to opportunities before. And it's really funny, as you're saying that, I'm like, I'm chairing my next first executive committee meeting next week. And it was because the person texted me just like, hey, do you have time to talk? And then called me and asked me to do it. And I actually told her on that phone call, I was like, if you had emailed me, I don't know if I would have said yes. Like, the fact that you called me made me be like, okay, you know what? And gave her reasoning why she thought I would be the best person for this was so useful. And this is somebody who's done opportunities before, but I still am sometimes intimidated. So I think it's really important as a sponsor to recognize that it won't always be easy. Sometimes you might have to ask them, not once, not twice, maybe 3 times, but also being okay if they really don't want to do it, be like, it's okay, I'll wait for the next door for you then.
Yeah. That's such a key point, right? Yeah.
For sure.
Meeting folks where they're at also.
Yes. So the next part, I'm actually very excited for this question, because I think both of your job experiences and mine all kind of have touched upon like community engagement, sponsorship. Is what steps can organizations take to collaborate with community organizations, schools, post-secondary institutions to establish a pipeline for Black youth talent and promote a culture of diversity and inclusion, while also thinking about mental health? Very long-winded, but basically, how can community work better with, post-secondary and these other institutions, all to support Black youth? It's very open and very tied into your work.
Yeah.
Just off the top is bridging the two together, making forums where both of them can, thrive. And what I mean by that is, I remember going to college and not knowing what resources were available to me. Why? There's room there to say, okay, how much percentage of our student body consists of Black individuals? And do they know about the resources that are available to them that are in that same community? why is that left out of the equation? So that's an easy partnership opportunity there, because those organizations could be talking with those institutions to say, okay, you can come in on these days. We can, just like how they do career fairs, just like how they do info sessions for upcoming courses every year. Why can't those community organizations come in and say, hey, well, we're speaking to this community, we're around, like, if you need us, like, reach out. Why does it always have to be, a digital information board that we have to refer to or find? And even then, when we find it, we have to sift through it and trying to see which ones are for us.
I was going to say, I love that even if it is digital.
Yeah, right.
Usually it's still a piece of paper on the guidance counselor's wall.
Right, and that's the thing. I feel like as much as things are getting more digital, I find that sometimes the more digital it gets, the more out of reach it is. And it's ironic because you have accessibility with the digital platform, but what do you take in the most? Right? So it's like, for me in particular as a youth, like, I know I will learn the most by this conversation more than I will searching for a link and then trying to remember in the back of my mind what they stand for. But if we, get introduced like somewhere in the community and you're like, oh, I do this and this and this, and then something speaking to me, there's going to be a connection. And that's how, like, I think that's how even my memory works. It's like relation, right? Like, okay, I was there about this thing and I met this person. I will remember. But if I'm like, I went on Google and I searched this thing and it was like, okay, that's gone 30 seconds from now.
Yeah.
So, I think it's important to sort of bridge those two together, because oftentimes funny enough is it also works both ways. So by the institutions creating platforms for the community organizations to come in, the community organizations also get an opportunity to expose the youth that they're working with to higher learning. So it's like there's no L here. Like everybody's winning.
Yeah.
So that's just
I think you're absolutely right. we can all win, and I think the goal in that is being able to see this as an ecosystem, right? So as a community organization, we exist to do XXX. We want to address barriers that Black youth are facing as it relates to workforce development and social and economic sustainability. So what does that look like as it relates to, higher education, training and development? Like, where are the areas in which, if we are aware of what the barriers are, then how are we connecting with community to be able to address some of those barriers, or be clear in ensuring that the ways in which we are providing support is evolving as our world is evolving, as technology is evolving, right? So I think it is really being clear on what are we here to do. And I actually, this was something that came up in a committee call, is like, we're driving the car. Who's in the car with us? Who's, who are the folks that are who are going to support us in like getting us to where we want to go, right? And so it's, again, going back to seeing it as us as an ecosystem and recognizing we all need to plug in certain areas, but really be in tune with, like you said, how are young people influencing or invited to come and speak about what's happening? Can community come into high schools or within these learning centers to talk about, what are the needs and where are we kind of bridging those gaps?
I'm just laughing that you brought up kind of like the concept of career fairs. I just got back from a conference. I landed last night, and the whole week I've been talking about how much I miss a former partnership with an organization where we would kind of arrange these fairs, and we would go into high school during their lunch period, sometimes even during the school time, and like the teachers would bring them down from their classes, and it would be, Helping Hands would come and talk about volunteering. Another organization might be like, come apply for a job for us. It might be the local library. And I really miss that sense of community, that sense of that ecosystem where we're all there being like, especially if you want to have mental health as a focus, in order for you to be mentally sound, they need to have all their needs taken care of, right? So by having all these organizations saying like, we're all doing our little part of this and we're coming together is really beneficial. So what I'm hearing is one thing is, encouraging organizations to say, if you are hosting a career fair, one, can we make sure that it's more diverse? It's not just careers, maybe it's a resource and career fair, and encouraging post-secondary institutions to do it. I've been in the industry like you guys for a couple of years now. I do not know of any post-secondary that I've seen run a resource fair. I've seen like career fairs, I've seen volunteer fairs, but I've never seen here's a community resource engagement fair. And it's wild to me that I've never seen at the post-secondary level. I had a partner that did at the high school level. Unfortunately, they no longer exist, and funding is always a part of it. But I'm really sad that that no longer exists. And I was talking about this week about how can maybe I look for funding so I can start this back for the community, at least the schools that we work with. And I think that's the big part is just knowing that we need to be an ecosystem. If we're going to work together, it can't be all just us trying to individually reach out to students, and how much easier it would also be for organizations to we're coming collectively together. Yeah. We're sharing the cost and we're reaching out to our target market.
As it relates to mental health, right? That systems navigation piece is so important, because if you don't understand or you don't know what resources are available to you, you don't know what's out there, you can feel alone and isolated in the steps that you're trying to take to move forward. And so and certainly it can have an impact on your mental health. So the more that we've said, the more that we can be as organizations rallying together to understand the roles that we all are going to play in addressing this common issue, the better we can support Black youth mental health around navigating, which is, navigating systems, navigating their employment, navigating what is my next step, or what can my next step look like.
Yeah, that guidance is such a big piece, and actually it's one of the key motivators in why I feel such alignment in the role that I'm in right now, because guidance counselors from high school, shout out Mr. Neal, Miss Keldo McDonald, and a couple other family members, without guidance, where do you go? Where do you start? What do you even want? What is out there? And so guidance is essential.
I think we can all think of that one person. I'm so grateful to the person that helped me realize I did biomedical engineering. At the time, I learned about the word. It only was in 3 universities. And she's like, oh, look, why don't you search this word instead? And I was like, oh, I could stay in Canada and do this. And I think we're also grateful to that one person that just told us something. So yeah, what I'm really hearing is organizations coming together, creating that ecosystem, and really helping create the guidance. So I'm really happy that we hopefully came up with some great solutions for organizations and youth, and we're going to take a little bit of a break now.
I'm Richard Marshall, I'm a content creator, and I'm proud to be a stylist member at C. I remember that first day I was behind the sewing machine. I was so intimidated, but the team here is so exceptional, and they pick the right people to really nurture your gifts.
This program has a mixture of soft skills training, where we learn about everyday life skills that you need to be able to work in the costume industry, and then the technical stuff that really prepares them to work in the costume design industries. Imagine being able to work with people that look like you, that share the same experience as you, the same culture. You feel tight-knit, and it feels like a family. So when we work together in a group, everybody relates to the same experiences, which makes it different from any program.
We're here today giving members the opportunity to practice having a commercial shoot for the Hudson's Bay. Here, we're actually doing it for real. You get a chance to go out there, do the shopping, do the buying, collect the receipts, have everything organized. It really is about putting members in a space where they can actually practice these skills, so that when they actually join the industry, they're able to get a head start and just hit the ground running.
The talent has always been there for me. But what C has provided is a lot more structure. It takes into consideration like budgeting, like actually planning out your creative process. And I feel like that experience is pretty unique.
It feels good to be in a space that is for young Black professionals. It feels very comfortable. Going forward, I feel like the possibilities are endless for me. Like, I feel like I could see myself styling for music videos, for special events.
I think the members this time have been like really active and really ambitious, and it's really nice to like give them the opportunity to showcase their talents. We're also introducing them to NADA, which is a union for costume designers, so it's nice that they actually get an introduction into the world of costume design, like right upon graduating.
And we're back. Thank you so much. That was a great break. Conversation's just amazing so far. I'm in my glory, honestly. But I want to get into a really key question, actually, and just see where this goes. So it's, what initiatives can organizations implement to address potential microaggressions and unconscious biases that may affect the workplace experience of Black youth workers?
Maybe I'll get started. I think, a big part of it does come down to the training. Larger organizations definitely have the capacity, and usually, the larger organization you're at, the more training they have in general. I think it is making that workplace discrimination, module you have and talk about microaggressions. And I would say the second part to not just talk, and so I would say smaller organizations, I think, also get a benefit of saying online, there are a lot of resources now that you can implement at your organizations. But the second part, I would say not just training, but it's also kind of, if someone does say, I felt discriminated against, something did happen, making sure you believe them, making sure you say that, okay, because I think the biggest thing that, maybe sometimes happened, especially, I say as a Black woman with her hair, stuff has happened and they've been like, oh, well, they didn't really mean it like that. And you're like, okay, I didn't know what they mean but I can tell you how I felt. I can tell you how this impacted me. So even as an organization, as HR, being like, okay, and just stop it less being like, they didn't mean like that. It's more taking that energy to recognize what impact that made on the person. Feeling that microaggression, feeling that discrimination, I think is really key. That isn't really, I feel like, being done. And there's so much focus on like trying to police whether the discrimination happened or not, instead of what impact did whatever was said or done have.
Yeah, I thank you for saying that, because what I'm hearing is it's less about proving the intention and more about understanding the impact, right? And how we move from that. I feel like so with that in mind, right? And what are some strategies really we think we can use for employers really to understand like the impacts of their Black employees? Because sometimes like we said, we don't feel safe coming out about these things. So how might we bring this up in a conversation with an employer as a Black youth, if there's any sort of suggestions on that?
I feel like this is hard when it kind of goes back to the earlier questions on creating that open and honest feedback system, making sure that young people feel like they could give back. I think, and even, your point on like, if something happened, it needs an equal public, if it was publicly done, then it needs a public reaction back to it. So it's so much of what we've said just all like ties back into that. I will give an example earlier of like even creating, when you talk about like that open and honest feedback part, I think is also making it sure really clear if something happens, knowing who you can go to. So we're, again, a quite small organization, but what I have is on the, employee training guide that even the volunteers get when they start. It's like the first file they get has a page that says, if you have an issue with whoever your manager is, you go to the next person, and it even has, if you have an issue with Janelle, like, this is who you talk to. If you have an issue with this is who you talk to make sure that they don't just feel that because I maybe said something to them and they feel discriminated against, that, well, Janelle is the executive director, therefore it ends with her. We can't, there's nothing else that can be done. So I think it's making sure that people know that there is a hierarchy, but also that you don't feel that you're going to be getting blowback for going over your manager's head. For if your manager was the one or a coworker was to do something. And I think I said that taking away that policing and being like, we're not trying to prove intent, we're just trying to focus on what the impact, I think will less make you feel that your coworkers are going to retaliate against you because they're not worried about getting in trouble. Like, I'm going to say the word getting in trouble because I think that is what people are focused on, is like, I'm not going to complain about my coworker that I have to still sit beside every day, knowing that now, even if they got in trouble, that now they're just gonna be miserable towards me, even if they don't do anything bad. That just that vibe changing is gonna be bad, but just be like, hey, like, I didn't appreciate that you said this. This is how I felt. Hopefully, I'm hoping that focusing, as you said, less on the intent, more on the impact would like help change stuff for both the youth and towards managers.
Yeah, thank you for that. Because that's a big topic, especially for Black youth in the workplace. So, and an essential and a sensitive one at that. So with that, I don't believe we have any more questions. So we would love to wrap. First, we want to say thank you to the City of Toronto for making this project come to life and supporting us in doing so. I want to say thank you to our guests. You guys have been amazing. Just the wealth of knowledge you bring to the conversation, your perspectives, everything, honestly. So really appreciated. And last but not least, our director, Vano, blessings to you, this immaculate setup, this flawless run, and our co-producer, Trinae, the amazing. So thank you. And with that concludes our chat today. So take care.